Hello and welcome to the This Works For Me Virtual Summit. I'm your host, Permpate Watson. I am the director of the Faculty Development Center at Murray State University. Are you looking for strategies to manage controversial topics in your course? Well, our guest today, Dr. Brian Clardy, will be providing you with some strategies to do so. Dr. Clardy, welcome.
Thank you for having me.
Great. So could you tell us a little bit about yourself, who you are, where you're from, and what you do?
Well, I'm an associate professor of history at Murray State University. I've been here for 13 years, but I began my teaching career here as a graduate assistant, and I've been teaching for almost 30 years at different places. I've taught subjects as diverse as American politics, African American studies, U.S. history, and U.S. foreign policy. And so over the last 30 years, one of the things I've been able to do is to teach in the classroom during some of the more pivotal moments in American and global history: the fall of the Soviet Union, the end of the Cold War, the OJ verdict, the LA riots in 1992. I've taught during the controversial presidential elections, such as the election of 2000 and 2016, and some of the controversies there. So I've been in a position to have to address these topics in the classroom because the circumstances demanded it.
Wow. And we're so glad that you'll be sharing with us some of the experience that you have had and some strategies to help us to manage controversial topics in the classroom.
Anything I can do to help.
In fact, the title of your strategy is Managing Controversial Course Topics.
Mm-hmm.
So tell us what got you interested in this topic and the strategies that you're going to be sharing. How have they worked for you? What impressed you to start using those strategies?
Well, I've always been a news hound. I've always tried to keep up with current events, and especially events which shape the lives of people. I'm in the social sciences, so I deal with history, I deal with politics, I deal with social and cultural relations, and I know that there's a close relationship between major events that occur, how students view them, and how that can cloud classroom conversation if left unmanaged. And so I've learned over the last 29 years by trial and error. But with each particular issue, I learned something new. I have some takeaways from it so that when another major controversial issue happens, then I can bring it up again and I can do it differently than I did the time before. That helps me as an instructor, that helps the students. And also letting them know, and this is something I've gleaned over the last 29 years too, making sure that the classroom is safe space where students can tell their story, where they can articulate their views and not be frowned upon, not feel intimidated, and also to learn new perspectives.
Great. So could you share with us some of the strategies that you have used to manage controversial topics in your course?
One of the things that I do is I try to set the parameters. I don't try to make them too narrow because I don't want to choke off dialogue, but I want to set some ground rules for how we address this. For example, that we listen. We listen to each other. That no one monopolizes the whole conversation, not even me. That we share our stories, that we're frank, that we're open. That we're sensitive not to use language, however, that we know is going to offend someone else. That we can agree without being horribly disagreeable. That we can have a mix-up of ideas, that we can argue and do so respectfully, and one that benefits intellectual inquiry. So I set those ground rules ahead of time. And then I, as an objective moderator, I present whatever the issue is or whatever the historical context or circumstances. And I try as best as I can to play devil's advocate because I want students to be able to see both sides of the picture. I don't want them to leave with their biases reinforced. I want them to leave that classroom understanding the alternative arguments so that they can continue that conversation in their dorm rooms, in the frat houses, in the coffee houses, and in the places where they socialize with their fellow classmates. So my penchant toward constructive dialogue goes beyond just the classroom experience.
Wow. So I know you said that you set parameters. You gave us some example, but some of these parameters might sound a little bit. Some student might not understand what it means to be sensitive. They might not understand what it means to not dominate the conversation. How do you make these ground rules practical for students?
I had a situation during, this is right after 9/11, which was one of those moments where I really had to make this work. And I had one student who was just advocating at the top of her lungs, just go over and blow them all up. And I'm like, whoa, hold up now. We can't do that. Dial it back a little bit. And so I'll throw in sort of a monkey wrench to keep the conversation from spiraling out of control.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, her anger may or may not be justified. That's her story. That is her truth. That's how she feels. But we can't have irresponsible dialogue like that. Not in any setting, because that causes people's defenses to go up. That causes anger. That causes hurt. That causes disrespect. And that's one area we can't go to.
So I know you mentioned 9/11 as an example. Could you walk us through a specific time or example? It may even be the same 9/11. Could you walk us through an example where you were able to use to manage a controversial classroom topic?
Yes. At the time, I was teaching in Triton College in River Grove, Illinois, which is about 14, 15 miles outside Chicago. And on campus, that Friday after the incident, we had a huge memorial service out there in the quad.
That's after the 9/11?
Yeah, we had ministers there. We had bagpipes there. The president of the college spoke, and different other folks. We basically were mourning what had happened on that Tuesday before. As it turned out, I had an American politics classroom discussion afterwards. I couldn't cancel class. The show had to go on. So everybody came into the classroom obviously feeling very, very emotional. One of the first things that I said was, okay, what do you feel about what just happened here? Tell us how you are feeling. Tell us what's running through your heart and your emotions right now. I gave them free rein to actually express the very visceral and guttural feelings that they were having at that moment. And then I channeled it into, okay, where do we go next steps as a nation? How do we continue the process of healing? How do we continue the process of engaging our governmental leaders and coming up with viable solutions for how to resolve what happened this past Tuesday? And so we had a thorough discussion immediately after everyone had a chance to tell how, because students were crushed. They were totally devastated. People were crying and so forth. So we had a very fruitful discussion on the way forward and proposing different ideas. And so I told them, okay, now you've proposed, you've told me, you've told each other, write your congressman, write your senator, send notes to the White House. Now, I can't tell you what to say to Senator Durbin. I can't tell you what to say to Senator Fitzgerald. I can't tell you what to say to President Bush. But some of the same solutions that you came up with and that we came up with as a body, tell them, get involved in the process. If you want to write an op-ed to one of the local papers, do so. But I was wanting them to help them to craft their particular arguments in a logical and cogent kind of way. And it started with that classroom discussion.
Wow. So how do you find that students have been responding to your use of these strategies?
By and large, they have been favorable. I know that I'm doing a good job when people on both sides sort of raise questions as to whether I'm favoring one side or the other. I'm not. I mean, I have my own personal views, but I keep those out of the classroom discussion. When, for example, we have a political conflict and liberals think I'm being too conservative, or conservatives think I'm being too liberal. Well, that means I've kind of shaken up both sides. But I want to play devil's advocate. I want them to see both sides of the argument. And by and large, most students appreciate it, but some, of course, are going to leave with some negativity, and that's understandable. You're not going to win everybody over, and you're not always going to get this right. That's just not going to happen. That's not realistic. But as long as the students are thinking, long after the classroom discussion is over, and carrying on that dialogue, then I've done my job.
So it seems as if you have been having a smooth sailing with these controversial topics. Perhaps there are no challenges, right?
I'm not going to say it was smooth sailing, because some of the issues that have come up since the early 1990s have been devastating. 9/11 was clearly one of those. They have been very raucous, such as the last presidential election in 2016, such as the way that the election ended in 2000. I had come in the next Wednesday morning after that election, running off of 90 minutes of sleep and caffeine. So I had to be very much alert to guide the students through that, and that was an ongoing story. So I'm not going to say they've been completely error-free. I've made some missteps insofar as how to present the material when I was a younger and more inexperienced professor. But what happens when you make those missteps as an instructor, you learn. And you take what you have learned when the next major event occurs. And you learn what not to do and what not to say. And that really helps you as well as it helps the students. It's a learning curve for both.
So you, in the example that you gave us earlier with the 9/11 situation, you went into the classroom, and one of the first questions that you asked your class was, "What are you feeling?" Is that typically how you start these controversial topics?
Well, in that instance, I asked what you were feeling because it was a very emotional tribute. It was a very emotional memorial. In fact, I did one of the readings for that. So my nerves and spirit were kind of on edge too. But I wanted the students, since they were 18, 19, 20-year-olds, they had not experienced, and neither had I, honestly, had not experienced a national tragedy on that scale. And we had several days to process what had happened. When we had the event on campus, that drove it home. This is real. The country is under attack. Thousands have died. And we memorialized that. So I wanted the students to be able to feel free to express their feelings before we got into the substance of what had happened and next steps going forward.
So with an emotional topic like that, how do you even introduce ground rules, or how do you bring in the ground rules? Is it easier to bring in ground rules for other types of topics?
It is. Presidential elections, no one dies. OJ verdict, no one dies after that. Feelings may be hurt. Feelings may be raw. But we're not talking about tragedy. Now, in a tragic type situation such as 9/11, or such as what's happened over the last several days here in this country, those feelings can be rubbed very, very, very raw. Where we're talking about the toll on human life. In those type of situations, you kind of allow people to express themselves, and those ground rules, you introduce those gradually. But you allow people to be able to express their true feelings and to express any hurt or pain that they may feel. If I went in with ground rules and said, okay, El Paso happened, this is how we are going to talk about this, they will shut down, and rightfully so. But if you allow them to tell their truth, to express their truth, to tell their story, to feel comfortable opening up, then you can say at some point, now this is what we're going to do, folks. We're going to tell our truth, but we're not going to be disrespectful of each other. We're going to listen. We're going to be open. We're going to be sensitive to how other people feel, because all of us, including myself, we have been shaken to our core by this. So yeah, it's gradual, and you have to take it on a case-by-case basis.
Yeah.
As I said, you're not always going to get it right.
So someone might be listening to this conversation and they might be thinking, well, Dr. Clardy, the course that you teach, the topics that you teach really lend themselves more easily to having these discussions. So what would you say to someone who resonates with what you said, but they're a little bit hesitant to introduce any controversial topic, or they're not even sure where to start? What would be some first step that they could take?
Not to have a knee-jerk reaction, to think it through. If you want to bring this into your classroom, if you feel that it's germane and relevant, do so by all means. Take the temperature of the classroom, kind of gauge where students are and where you are, and determine your own comfort level. In the 1960s, and I keep going back to this, in the 1960s, at colleges and universities, professors sometimes would allow students in most courses to talk about how they felt about the war, or how they felt about civil rights and so forth. Universities started opening up free speech areas where students could express themselves. They had teach-ins. Professors across all disciplines helped to participate in the student-led teach-ins, going all the way back to from 1964 with the free speech movement going forward. But they did so, this was new territory for them. So they had to be very careful with that. And some of those professors got accused of bias, and that kind of comes with the territory. So what I would say to my colleagues is that if the spirit moves you, go for it. But if you feel that this is going to obstruct what you do in the classroom, that it's going to wreck your pedagogy, that you will lose credibility in the classroom, that you're going to lose the class or something, then tread very lightly.
Yeah. Good advice. Because the situation is different. Yeah. So let me ask you, are there any resources that you would recommend for our viewers to review?
Yes, I referenced what happened in El Paso, and of course we had the tragedy in Dayton. And over the last few months, racial tensions have really been heightened to a degree that honestly I've not seen in my lifetime. Race is becoming one of those controversial topics. And as I explained at the faculty summit that we had at the university at the start of the term last week, there's going to be another incident. There's going to be another incident where racial tensions and racial animosity, sadly enough, will be stoked. We live in a very, very contentious climate. There's a book that I would recommend that would help give students and faculty some historical perspective about where we are and how we got here. This work came out a couple of years ago. Michelle Alexander's work, The New Jim Crow. Now, granted, a lot of it deals with issues regarding mass incarceration and so forth in the criminal justice system. But she does highlight the history of how we got here from slavery to Jim Crow to the civil rights movement and so forth. And she kind of takes a step by step as to how we got from point A to point D. And so that's a very good launching point, I think, for folks to do some good reading and to set the intellectual parameters for what's really going on in the United States. We've got to start talking to each other. We've got to start listening to each other. We've got to unburden ourselves from these assumptions. And as I said last week, either consciously or subconsciously, we have to get rid of the word all. We can't make sweeping generalizations about each other. Now's the time in our university classes and in society generally that we start being attentive, that we start being historically sensitive, and that we come to these controversial topics with levity, that we come to it with an aim toward creating dialogue and less argument, and that we can start understanding each other.
Wow, well said. And in the last minute or so of this conversation, we could end it right here. but just in case, do you have a final challenge or encouragement for our viewers?
Stay informed. Stay informed. I know I'm a news hound. I'm either watching Fox or MSNBC or CNN more so than I watch any reality shows. I missed the VMAs last night, and I wouldn't have been able to catch up with it in any way. I don't know any of the new artists, but I would say that, you know, stay involved. We have this, that we can download news apps where we can get breaking news, where we can get commentary from a variety of online, well, credible online sources. News sources, op-eds. Stay informed, stay informed, stay informed. And also look at different news sources which may not necessarily jive with your point of view. If you are a conservative, watch MSNBC. If you are a liberal, watch Fox News. There's nothing wrong with investigating the other side, because when you come to common ground, that makes dialogue that much better.
Wow. Thank you very much for sharing these strategies and for the resource that you recommended. Viewers, I would encourage you to check it out. You will find a link to it in the video description below. And so, Dr. Clardy, thank you so much for taking the time to share with us today.
Thank you. It was an honor and a pleasure. Anything I can do to help. Great.
And viewers, I encourage you to share this conversation with others, and we look forward to seeing you in the next episode of this virtual summit. See you soon.